What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton is already losing patience with Ferrari, and that his greatest enemy could be within the same team? What seemed like a dream alliance could be becoming a nightmare at full speed. Lewis Hamilton came to Ferrari as a symbol of hope, almost like a sports messiah. After closing an era with Mercedes, his incorporation into the Scuderia was interpreted as the master play to dethrone Red Bull and claim a last glory before retirement. What he found, however, was a dysfunctional machinery makeup of progress. The team had promised a technical revolution with the SF-25, announcing it as the culmination of years of learning, a direct evolution of the SF-24 that in 2024 had returned Ferrari to the conversation by the titles. The reality, on the other hand, was a clumsy, unstable and plagued car of commitments that make it practically inconducible in the limit. Hamilton, with 40 years, did not reach Maranello to improvise. His daily routine remains that of an obsessive athlete, his impeccable physical preparation, and his most acute mental approach than ever. However, after the first 10 races, disappointment is evident. While Charles Leclerc, raised in the Ferrari structure, still manages to squeeze something from the car with 3 podiums, Lewis has not been able to overcome the 4th place in any main race. That statistic does not reflect lack of skill. It reflects technical frustration. The car simply does not respond to its style or any coherent style. In each Grand Prix, the story is repeated with a familiarity that becomes cruel. Promising practices ruined by chaotic classifications, questionable strategies from the wall, and a car that reacts as if it had its own life. Impotence is not only noticeable in its time, but in its body language, in carefully calibrated statements that suggest an awkward truth. Hamilton no longer fully trusts the project. That erosion of trust is dangerous because it is not limited to the track. It affects the team's environment. There is tension in briefings, there is discomfort in the gestures of engineers. Technical meetings have become more sharp. And the most worrying of everything, Ferrari seems more concerned with justifying their failures than to correct them. For a competitor like Lewis, this is unacceptable. He has not come to rebuild a project from scratch. He came to close his career with a glorious note, to add a last golden line to his legend. And at this time, everything found in Ferrari is empty echoes of past greatness, a palace full of history but lacking clear direction. This context, more than any time per turn or result in the table, is what is beginning to push Hamilton to the limit. It is not the lack of podiums that hurts the most. It is the feeling of being trapped in a machine that does not want or cannot change. And that, for a pilot like him, is the greatest possible failure. How far will your patience come before taking more drastic measures? That is the question that already begins to disturb everyone inside and outside Maranello. The SF-25 was presented as the jewel of the crown of Italian engineering. Ferrari promised to have learned from the mistakes of the past. They said that the new car was a total evolution of the SF-24, with a more aggressive approach in aerodynamics, a complete revision of the rear suspension and an optimized design to make the best of its pilots in any type of layout. But what they delivered on the track was not a competition weapon. It was an empty promise dressed in carbon. From the first Grand Prix in Australia, the symptoms of a conception error were impossible to hide. The first big problem arose with the management height. The SF-25 was designed to run extremely low, maximizing the efficiency of the flat soil and the soil effect. But that philosophy crashed straight ahead with the reality of the wear of the central skate, something that was evidenced in China with the disqualification of Hamilton. The emergency solution was to raise the car above the original design. This decision completely destroyed aerodynamic efficiency. Ferrari went from having a car designed for the ground effect to one that operates outside its ideal performance zone, as if trying to fly a plane with crooked wings. But that was just the beginning. The true epicenter of the disaster is in the rear suspension of traction rods. In theory, this system had to offer greater stability in traction and better control over car changes in braking and acceleration. In practice, it was a system unable to integrate with the aerodynamic package. The interaction between chassis and airflow was completely uncoordinated. The result is a car that varies its curve behavior in curve, as if it had multiple mechanical personalities. No pilot can surely predict how SF-25 will react when the steering wheel turns or step on the accelerator under limit conditions. This unpredictability is lethal in Formula One. What elite pilots are looking for is not a car that is simply fast, but one that is predictable. The SF-25 is neither one thing nor the other. Telemetry data reveals abrupt losses of aerodynamic load in the rear, particularly in rapid curves, forces constant corrections that wears both mentally and physically to the pilots. In circuits such as Albert Park or Shanghai, it has been possible to see how the car loses grip right at the worst moment, generating small landslides that compromise all the time back. To this is added an even more alarming phenomenon, the overheating of the tires in classification. The car has gone from not heating enough compounds to burn them too fast, especially in the last sector of the laps thrown. This prevents completing competitive turns in optimal conditions, directly affecting the starting position and therefore the entire career strategy. A car that degrades badly the tires in the race can at least compensate with rhythm. One that fails in classification is convicted since Saturday. The consequence of all these problems is a car that demands to the maximum but delivers to the minimum. There is no margin for pilot errors because the car is already working on the edge of instability. There is no ability to adapt between circuits, because engineers have not yet found a really reliable base configuration. And worst of all, each solution seems to open new problems. Changing the rake affects the diffuser flow. Adjust the suspension, unbalance the distribution of pesos. It is an endless cycle of technical commitments that keep SF-25 in an expensive and frustrating mediocrity. Hamilton is accustomed to environments where the pilot has a voice and vote, where decisions are the product of serious and grounded strategic debates. In Ferrari, however, he is discovering a system that still relies too much on obsolete hierarchies, where the technical structure fears to take risks and decisions seem guided by fear of error rather than by the ambition to win. That organizational culture, marked by years of media pressure and lack of long-term vision, is colliding with Lewis's work philosophy. For a pilot who has dominated the hybrid era, which has been part of one of the most effective structures of modern history with Mercedes, this lack of vision is simply intolerable. What is happening is not a simple technical divergence. It is a deep disagreement about how a winning team is conceived. Vasseur, in his role as team leader, tries to maintain public calm, minimizing criticism and defending collective work. But the tension grows. Internally, there is already talk of tense meetings, direct exchanges in which Hamilton would have demanded immediate structural changes in the way the car takes place, prepared on weekends and strategies are executed. It is not about whims but alerts based on data and experience. The problem is that Vasseur seems to resist giving control or making the deep changes that the pilot considers necessary. And in the midst of this strip and loosen, Ferrari is paralyzed. Because he cannot lose his star figure not only for his sports impact, but for the media value it represents, but he does not want to recognize that his current structure is failing. It is a tense rope that threatens to break. Mutual respect between pilot and boss is beginning to crack. And when that relationship erodes, especially in an organization like Ferrari where emotions and pressure are permanent, deterioration can become irreversible. Hamilton's frustration has begun to demonstrate beyond the paddock walls. Although it is publicly measured, their words contain more and more nuances of evening criticism. The phrases such as "we are working to understand the car," or "there is still room to improve internal communication," are not simply diplomatic. They are symptoms of a pilot who has lost faith in the project. And when a leader like Lewis stops believing, the effect on the morale of the team can be devastating. Because in Ferrari, every decision, every error, every tension is magnified under the magnifying glass of Italian history and the press, which does not forgive. The most worrying thing for Ferrari is that there is no clear plan B. Because if Hamilton decides that its cycle must be closed ahead of time, something that no longer seems so unlikely, the team would be not only without its most media star, but also without an internal figure with the authority and knowledge to question wrong decisions. Lewis's early march would not be just a symbolic blow. It would be an alarm that would resonate throughout the paddock. It would be the confirmation that Ferrari once again has failed not for lack of talent, but for not knowing how to manage talent. Some might think that Hamilton still has a margin to wait, that he could endure another year while Ferrari rebuilds his course. But that vision is unaware of the pilot's character. Lewis has never been someone who tolerates mediocrity passively. His history confirms it. In 2012, he publicly challenged McLaren before signing for Mercedes. In 2016, he pressed internally for changes in the team after the lost championship. And in recent years, he did not hesitate openly questioning Mercedes's management when things did not work. If you see that Ferrari is stagnant, you will not wait for things to improve. At this point, Hamilton's story in Ferrari becomes much more than a simple sports plot. It is a human history of betrayed expectations, talent faced with rigid structures, and the eternal struggle between the desire to compete at the highest level and the harsh reality of a team that is not up to its history. The question is no longer whether Lewis Hamilton has what is necessary to win. That is out of doubt. The true question is whether Ferrari has the capacity, humility, and leadership to sustain and enhance a champion of his size in this final stretch of his career. And now it's your turn. What do you think of all this? Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of the relationship between Hamilton and Ferrari? Do you think Lewis should continue betting on a project that, until now, has given more frustrations than satisfactions? Tell me in the comments, what do you think will be the next Hamilton movement? Will you continue to fight from within to transform Ferrari, or do you consider that your time is over there? And if you decide that it is time for him to leave, where do you think he would fit better? And if you got here, it means that this issue matters as much as us. So subscribe if you haven't done it yet.